So hello, my name's Karen Anderson and I'm from Homes England. I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to this part of the winter learning session. And it's one of a series of sessions around trying to improve everybody's knowledge on particular topics that have been of interest to you. So today's event is on estate regeneration, and with the background and renewal and all that entails, it's great to see such a good example and to share it with you today. So this slide tells you about the Local Government Capacity Centre, and this is our mission. We established the centre following extensive research and consultation with you across local government and with a whole range of other partners to determine where authorities most need support and how we might best deliver that. The learning programme's just one of the tools that the Local Government Capacity Centre's now got in operation. We've also got a housing information hub, which is an index of professional housing resources, and that's accessible via gov.uk. We've got fact sheets to support local authorities with the case for housing and development regeneration, and a capacity analysis tool, which can help you assess your capacity. So we look forward to hearing from you at the survey poll at the end of the session. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda for today. We're going to hear from Sarah Hall from Beyond Housing about Church Lane North, which is a really good example of a regeneration project, alongside the architect and Equans, the contractor involved. So you hear it from all sides, and we'll sum up with some lessons learned. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah from Beyond to introduce herself and the project. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this on what feels like the 15th consecutive Monday in January. I'm Sarah Hall. I'm the Regeneration Manager from Beyond Housing. And our first slide there just shows not Beyond Housing's logo, but the branding that we've created specially for the regeneration at Church Lane, and I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. We've been asked for a practical guide to regeneration on the state level, and we simply want to tell you the story of our journey through the inception, the vision, and the delivery, and hope that you can benefit from our experience and gain some practical tips. I think we could have done a whole presentation on the planning, on the funding, on the community consultation, but this is just an overview across the whole of it, and perhaps in the Q&A we can pick up some more of the detail. I'm going to lead off, followed by Mark from Logic Architects, who led the master plan and the detailed design, and then Darren from Equans, who are our main contractor partner, delivering the new build and the regeneration elements across the scheme. And then I'll bring it back together with some reflections and lessons to share, and we'll answer some questions. Next slide, please. Next slide again, please. So just first off, to help you situate yourselves, Beyond Housing are a registered provider based in the northeast of England and in North Yorkshire. Our genesis is as the stock transfer of Scarborough and Redcar and Cleveland councils, which is where our story starts really for Church Lane in terms of the stock transfer. We've got around 15,000 homes and around 30,000 customers, and we develop around 250 new homes every year. And our stock is a mixed profile of rural, suburban and urban areas, with some of our customers living in areas with various and long-running challenges around deprivation and life chances. And Church Lane in Grangetown is one such place. Haven't got the ability to point on the map, but there's a little gap in the sort of middle where it just says Middlesbrough underneath, which is roughly where Church Lane is. So that area is in Grangetown. It's born from the steelmaking industry, and it saw significant post-war expansion, particularly in terms of council house building, which gave rise to estates like Church Lane North. And this was an area long on a promise for investment, and was identified as one of our poorer performing estates in the 2010s, so quite a way back now. And the original business case and plan was worked up at that time. And one of the lessons I want to bring out from this is if you're thinking about doing this, you needed to have started 10 years ago. Next slide, please. But why now and why here? So, as I said, we'd started to work up a plan and undertook some consultation prior to the introduction of the rent cap in 2015. And the impact of that was that, like in many other areas, investment was paused or scaled back. But this remained a corporate priority for us. And as soon as we were able, we went back to the community. We didn't reconsult, but we redeveloped on themes that we previously identified with the community. And Mark's going to talk a little bit about how, in a bit more detail, about how we developed that vision with the community. And so why here? I'm sure that you think that image looks okay from the drone perspective. We owned 75% of the homes on the estate, and it had a significant turnover and quite a high number of voids, but also a very established community with lots of extended families. As I said, the picture looks okay, and you might notice the lack of cars and the vast amount of green space, which sounds very nice, but in fact, the estate was a bit of a labyrinth with very few through roads, parking away from properties. So it means bringing your shopping, bringing your pushchair, bringing your wheelchair from a parking cart, with those grassed areas in the middle, not really owned by anyone, and not part of gardens and not part of anything functional. What you assume on that image are back gardens, are just open spaces to the front of homes, and what you can't see is the number of cut-throughs and alleyways between and around houses. And all of this layout contributed to high levels of crime and antisocial behaviour and made the area difficult to police, both formally and informally, on a day-to-day basis. So by the time we get to the detailed consultation, the community were understandably somewhat resigned to the situation and somewhat disengaged, as the layout of the estate was forever working against them and against partners trying to work in the area. However, as I said, there's lots of extended families, lots of long-term residents living on the estate, including the local ward member, who challenged us to, well, we'll believe you when we see a digger on site, and said that they would only believe how serious we are when they saw one. And this was a significant factor. All of the having extended families on this estate was a significant factor in the decision to keep customers in situ whilst the works took place, rather than undertaking what would have been a really vast decant. And so the next couple of slides further illustrate some of the physical issues that residents wanted us to address. Next slide, please. Thanks, Adam. So as well as that overall layout, there was concerns around the condition of properties, particularly in relation to energy efficiency. And this is pre the cost of living crisis and the increase in heating and fuel bills. But nevertheless, at that time, it was still seen as an issue for people. Next slide, please. We had instances of fly tipping on those bits of land that didn't serve much purpose that I pointed out in the overview shot, and parking areas that you can see in the top, for me, the top left, with very little natural surveillance. So you can see all of those gable ends of properties don't have windows looking out onto the parking car. And a sort of lack of privacy and personal defensible space, and back to front properties. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, there's lots of alleys and cut-throughs, but also these oversailing bedrooms that's on the left with the wheelie bin underneath, with public access underneath, leading to people congregating under there and acts of antisocial behaviour as well, which is a particular problem for this estate. And again, the cut-through in the middle of the picture with no natural surveillance for that either, and the same with the alleyways. Next slide, please. So just to talk a little bit about what the community needed and wanted. And I've mentioned the close community and extended families living across the estate. And the age profile is fairly young, with a high number of single parent families living on pretty low incomes, and lots of households with disabilities, illness and caring responsibilities impacting their ability to work. And these factors also influenced our decision not to do a large-scale decant. And at Beyond, we decide on investments, particularly in terms of regeneration, sitting on this three-legged stool of data and evidence, colleague voice and customer voice. And the final piece of this scene setting is to set out the results of the initial formal perception surveys, supplemented mainly by informal opportunities for people to feed in their views, either through the consultation, through their housing officer, through the site team. So if we just move to the next slide. Thank you. Layout was the top priority for our customers, which I've talked a little bit about in the preceding slides, followed by property condition themselves, and the amount of fly tipping in ASB, all of which were kind of fueled further by the layout and use of the estate. So I hope I've set out that scene of a community and an area in need of change, frustrated by a lack of progress back in 2016, 2017-ish, and given us a real challenge to get started. And I hope you'll see, as Mark and Darren take us through the physical changes, that those issues have been considered and addressed. And I hope you can see that, particularly on the images in the video, that physical change that's been brought right through from the vision slides to now. So I'm going to pass over to Mark now to set out the vision, and you can move to the next slide now, Adam. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. My name's Mark Barlow. So I'm the architect and urban designer from Logic Architecture. We're a chartered practice, 3 offices across the northeast of England, working nationally, master planning, and also delivering regeneration schemes like Church Lane. I often get asked what my favourite job is, and I genuinely keep coming back to this one. It's a great example of how an inappropriate design can have a detrimental effect on people's lives, but also a huge opportunity for me and the team for a better design to make a real difference. There are 318 homes, so if we assume, say, 3 people per household, this project had the chance of improving the lives of 1,000 people. And that's why we became architects, to make a difference. We've prepared a number of master plans like this over the years to de-Radburnize, as it's called, problematic estates. But Church Lane was the first time that an RP actually came to us on this estate-wide scale. And I'm in awe at the commitment of Beyond to take on this ambitious project, which has taken 7 years to get to where we are today. So going back to 2007 was when we were first asked to identify options to improve the estate and eradicate antisocial behaviour as an alternative to a previous master plan that had been prepared, which proposed large areas of demolition in the worst areas. In fact, when we started, the project had already had some voids in these locations as tenants had moved out from properties, and then the properties were held back in anticipation of further demolition. But I think, as we all know, significant demolition obviously massively disrupts your community and can actually exasperate any antisocial behaviour problems with boarded up properties, for example, further reducing the pride in the neighbourhood. It also obviously reduces revenue coming into the estate. And thus our brief, which was different to the previous master plan, was to prepare a master plan of selective demolition, as in the fewer the better. In fact, and to see if we could still make a difference by looking more intelligently at what was causing the problems and see if a better layout could make a difference, instead of that easy option of just demolishing and starting again. So we move on to the next slide. Just a few words about Radburn. I don't know whether people will know. Radburn was actually a place in America. And back in 1929, somebody, an architect at the time, came up with this concept of trying to separate cars from people. Now, cars, back in 1929, cars were noisy, smelly, horrible devices that everybody was scared of. So you can see why they felt the need to separate the two and create these sort of green spaces which gave pedestrian routes for children to walk to school away from cars, keeping them safe. And there's nothing wrong with that as a concept. A great idea. Obviously, cars have moved on since then, and as have the dependency on the car and the number of cars that obviously exist. We move on to the next slide. So interestingly, the Radburn design was actually intended originally as a low density housing solution. And it wasn't until the sort of 60s that it became used in the UK for mass social housing. And obviously, as we've just said, things have changed a lot since then. Car ownership has increased, become more affordable. We all depend on the car much more. And then, as Sarah touched on, these parking courts are no longer practical because people don't want to park their cars there because they come back in the morning and they're vandalised. Nobody's looking after them. And obviously, it also means we get this decrease in the pride of the neighbourhood. There's no pride in those public areas anymore, as there maybe was back in the 60s when people looked after their spaces more. We move on again. So before I go on to the vision, let me just explain the estate as it is and the problems that it had. And I think this is where anybody taking on something like this needs to start. A lot of work at the beginning can pay dividends in understanding what the problem is with the estate before you try and fix it. So this slide here is a site plan deliberately coloured in with the lighter green are the public areas and the darker green are the private areas. And when I say private, I mean that they are secure. So they generally, along the southern edge there, they back onto another estate. So they are effectively back-to-back gardens, more of a sort of Victorian concept. And then the most of the estate, as you can see there, is completely open. And this is where people don't feel safe. I remember talking to a resident, and she said, I just don't feel safe in the house at night because I hear people outside my window. And to be fair to them, are they doing anything wrong? They're congregating, yes, not ideal, but they're standing in public space. They're kicking a ball against the wall in public space. You can't really say that they are, I mean, I don't know if it's deliberate that they're intimidating these people, but you can understand exactly why they don't feel safe living in these houses with so much public space. We move on again. So that last slide obviously shows you the problem in terms of the public space. The other problem causing the antisocial behaviour is this rabbit warren, labyrinth, as Sarah said, of pedestrian routes right the way across the estate. And this becomes a problem for navigation. You know, okay, pizza delivery doesn't know where he's going, but if you think about emergency services, that's a more serious issue, that they struggle to get to these properties in times of crisis. And when a policeman is chasing somebody, you know, they get lost going down these little alleyways, and people disperse, and you can't find anyone. We'll move on again. So this tries to highlight, we did some research into where the worst parts of the estate were. Inevitably, they are in these areas here with these oversailing bedrooms and these alleyways and these ginnels, no passive surveillance. And clearly, these areas needed instant attention. And what we were able to do was some quick wins by closing off some of these alleyways with alley gates. We did that quite early on. And that does make a difference, but it still leaves these areas then which nobody takes responsibility for, and they end up being used as dumping grounds, as you can see. We move on again. So it's no accident that the right to buys are congregated in areas that obviously don't have antisocial behaviour. And that is a really interesting thing to analyse, because what it enables you to do is to look at things that are right about the estate as well as things that are wrong about the estate. So here to the southern boundary, probably not of a huge surprise to you, this is where you get a congregation of right to buys. People like that concept of having a back-to-back garden and a parking space to the front, an in-curtilage parking space. They don't have to walk to the end of the street to get their car in the morning. It's there. It's in their own demise, and they can keep an eye on it, most importantly. If we move on again. So moving on to the vision, not only was my task to eradicate all these alleyways, look at maybe turning houses around so that they face onto a street, introducing new roads in certain areas so that you can get that in curtilage parking. But I also thought that the place needed a new identity. It needed a new lease of life. And the suggestion here was to create a central space in the middle and create what passionately known there as the heart of the estate in the centre, and a spine that runs in either direction. So we have a school to the left, and there were some allotments to the right. So it's useful to analyse the sort of desire lines that exist across the estate. And there's a tendency, morning and night, for people to merge towards the school and congregate at the gate to the school as well. So what I wanted to do was to try and hang on to that pedestrian connection, albeit make it into a home zone, so it could be a shared surface, but to create this split between the estate. And that instantly gives you that sort of navigation. So you can walk around the estate, and at any time you come across the spine and you think, okay, I know where I am. I can get myself back to the middle. I can get to the school. I can go to the shops. If we move on again. So this slide demonstrates how little we needed to demolish. So that brief at the beginning of selective demolition, these were the only properties that I felt that we needed to remove. And in order to create this spine through the middle, would you believe we only needed to remove 5 properties to create that connection all the way through? And then a few more in the centre, you'll see there was 2 terraces in the middle where it was very dense, and we wanted to create this new park in the centre. So in total, we demolished 19 properties. So out of 318, 19 is a small number. And we were able to bring back some of the voids that had been previously reserved because of the previous master plan, so they could be brought back in. We move on again. Now, obviously, when we create the new roads, the new in-curtilage parking outside everybody's front door, that means we no longer need the parking courts. So what we were able to do then is to actually use the parking courts for new build opportunities. And this is quite a nice number here. We were able to demolish 19, but rebuild 33. So we move on to the next slide, giving you a net total of 14. Yeah. And this is the final master plan. So you'll see here, if we go back to the very, not literally, think back to the very first slide with the darker green for the secure gardens, you can see the difference. Something like 97% of the entire estate now has in-curtilage parking. They can park at the front door. They have a secure back-to-back garden with only very small alleyways to drag their bins out, no through alleyways at all. In fact, if we think back to that slide at the beginning with the yellow routes everywhere across the estate, we managed to get rid of all of them. There aren't any public routes that aren't offered passive surveillance. They were all removed. And the idea being now that if you do need to get from one side of the estate to the other, you use a road. The more people that use the road, the more passive surveillance you get. So in addition to the master planning, Beyond also took the view that they wanted to uplift the properties as well. So the opportunity was taken to try and remove this fuel poverty situation to introduce external wall insulation. Now, we looked at the opportunities for the right to buyers to buy in if they wanted to at a discounted rate, a lot cheaper than they could ever achieve it because of the scale of the project. And none of the owner-occupiers bought in. None of them were interested, even at the discounted rate. So then we realised we were going to have this situation, as this slide tries to demonstrate, that you end up, the owner-occupied is the second and fourth property with the brickwork. You end up with a situation where the owner-occupiers really stand out. And some of them are in pretty poor condition. Some people make a bit more effort, but it ended up being this sort of hodgepodge of new and old. So the decision was taken from Beyond that what we had to do was actually reverse engineer that and introduce brickwork back into the new build. So if we move on to the next slide. So this, apologies for the graphics, it was 7 years ago. In our defence, things have moved on a bit now. We introduced more brickwork, as you can see here, using brick slips, which was a slight increase over the render, but worthwhile. So if we move on to the next slide, you'll see that this owner-occupied actually ties in with the rest of the terrace. And Beyond were very keen to make sure that that occurred. If we move on again. And the same is true for the new build as well. So we made sure that the new builds looked the same as the original, similar sort of detailing around the windows, similar cladding details, and just trying to give this cohesive look to the whole estate. Saying that some streets had grey cladding, some of them had green cladding, some of them had a bit more brickwork, trying to give each part of the estate its own identity instead of them all looking the same. If we move on again. So obviously we did a lot of consultation. I think in total we were probably consulting with residents for about a year before anything actually a spade went in the ground. And this was essential, but not everybody can read plans. We all understand that. And if we move on again, we looked at various ways of trying to convey what we were trying to do, because this is a bold thing to try and convince your residents that you're going to turn a house around, and by description that is difficult to comprehend. So we did a few slides, things like this. This currently shows, if you like, rear gardens on the outside onto the streets, and then a public space in the middle. If we go on to the next slide again, you'll see how we turn that around. So the front door effectively becomes on the other side. We had to give them a new letterbox, in some cases a new front door, but the important thing to get across was this back-to-back arrangement and then somewhere safe to park your car. Now, this was better than plans for getting the message across, but if we move on again, the other thing we did was we made a physical model. Now, this was the best thing that we ever did. And what we were able to do just out of polystyrene was make the entire estate, and we made the properties due for demolition, painted those red, and then the new builds blue. Now, this model obviously shows everything together, but what we were able to do at the consultation events was to physically pick up the red properties that were due for demolition. And then people got it. That was the best thing that we ever did. And you can just about see the spine that runs through the middle there with the 5 properties that created that new road. And then the blue obviously made sense because we were building on the parking courts again. If we move on again. This is my last slide. So just to say a few words about a pilot study. What we then committed to do was to create or pick one part of the estate where we worked up more detail. And it was only then that we started to talk to residents about rear gardens, how they were going to get their bin out, where they were going to physically park, and then they could actually go to that part of the estate and understand it much better. It did take a lot of effort to try and get this story across because it is such an ambitious, unusual thing to do, but it did work. And I would thoroughly recommend picking one part of the estate and bringing it all the way down to a smaller scale so that you can actually zoom in on the detail and people understand it much better. So that kind of summarizes the vision, and I'll hand over now to Darren, who's going to talk to you. He was actually, it's just before I do that, just worth saying that we did struggle to find a contractor. We tendered the scheme, and Equans stood out where they've got a really good regeneration experience, and we were keen that to continue working with them. But it was difficult to find somebody who would take this on because it is such a complex thing to do. You're working on a live estate, as I say, of 1,000 people, and you're working with them day in, day out for 2 years. So all credit to Darren and his team for getting us where we are today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Sterling. I'm the Director of Regeneration and Sustainability at Equans. Equans in the UK, in this particular instance, we provide services to public sector communities, local authorities, particularly around transformative regeneration, in which we are a market leader in the UK. So absolutely privileged to be asked to present our experiences on the Church Lane scheme to date. And it's a scheme that we've been involved in now for several years, supporting Beyond Housing, Mark and his team and others. And one of the main themes that I'll run through my presentation this morning will be partnership and the absolute necessity of being in this together on such a large, complex and lengthy scheme. So I just wanted to, if we move on to the first slide, please, Adam, I just wanted to kind of summarise what we've done and are doing down at Church Lane and who we're doing it with. So we have constructed 33 new homes, of which we're still in the process of completing the final ones. We've improved in excess of 300 homes. We are developing 3 new public open spaces as part of the redevelopment of the area. We've demolished 15 void properties to allow for the reconfiguration of the estate and to provide parking. We've created 200 private gardens. We're bringing 15 void properties back into use as part of the project, and we've improved 11 roads in and around the estate and reconfigured a number of those to facilitate access through. Now, none of this would have been possible if it wasn't for the key partners in the scheme all working incredibly closely together. So that's Beyond Housing, who have obviously developed and sponsored the scheme and have worked incredibly closely with us. WSP, who have acted as PM and PQS. Logic, who you've just heard from Mark. Portland, who are the consultant engineers. SRC, principal designers, and Southern Green, who've been involved with the landscape architecture, of which there has been quite a lot. Next slide, please. So at Equans, we work under the principle of we want to embed a customer journey and a community first culture in all of our work. And what that really means to us is that when we're on a project, then we are an extension of the client that we work for. So in this instance, when we are knocking on doors, engaging, liaising with residents, we are an extension of Beyond. So that should feel the same to a tenant as a Beyond representative turn up at your door. So what that really means is we've got to engage early. Consultation is absolutely critical to a scheme of this size and complexity, because as Mark's already mentioned, we haven't decanted anybody from the estate. Everybody has been in situ as we've worked around them, and they've been a lot of forbearance from people from tenants, from residents who have worked very closely with us to achieve what we've achieved. We've had, and I would say the key to that is we've had permanent customer engagement officers on that scheme, supporting Beyond's permanent caretaker who's been engaged throughout that scheme, and that's been absolutely essential in terms of getting the community buy-in, engagement, and ensuring that we maintain that partnership ethos right throughout the entire redevelopment programme. I would like to think that we have built through those team members a really strong relationship with our customers and our community and the agencies that support them. We've developed comprehensive communication plans for residents, which have obviously been changed multiple times as the scheme has developed. So if you look at this as a sort of a multi-phase approach where we've carried out extensive modernisation and improvement works to people's homes, as well as a demolition phase, a rebuilding phase, and an infrastructure phase. So there's some fairly unique elements to this particular project, which requires consistent and regular dialogue with everybody. And I think what's really important to share is that when you're working with partners, you've got to maintain a level of engagement throughout the scheme and be agile as one is going through it. Next slide, please, Adam. Sarah's already touched on this in her presentation, but we thought it was useful to give you an indication of how long we've all, in some fashion, been involved in delivering the regeneration at Church Lane North. So planning was submitted in May 2017, and we are looking to conclude the final construction works in June 2024. That gives you a real indication of the length of time, size of team, the level of complexity. And within that time, we've all gone through the pandemic, we've gone through hyperinflation, we've gone through various restrictions on availability of material and so on, which has all added to what was already an incredibly complex scheme. And I think without that partnership approach and model, that would have been impossible. Next slide, please. So just picking up from a construction perspective, the delivery challenges, which I've touched on some, and as of Mark and Sarah, as they've gone through their respective presentations, the scale, scope and complexity of this particular project can't be underestimated. It's been several years in the making, and then several years in actual productivity, with in excess of 1,000 people as well as agencies to deal with throughout that time. It gives you a sense of the scale of it. Maintaining constructive and positive engagement with our residents has been really important. I've talked about flexibility of approach, so as things change, which they invariably do on a scheme of this size and nature, it's important that all parties are engaged and able to make decisions in a timely fashion. I've mentioned the fact that we haven't decanted any residents as the work has been undertaken. One of the larger challenges we've had on the job is utilities, in terms of both the number of utilities that have affected the reconfiguration of roads, as well as demolition, and also some of the challenge around making sure that what we think is there is actually there, and then how do we overcome that to allow for the final design of the scheme. Mark and Sarah's both picked up on the mixed ownership, where we have less influence over ownership that isn't directly from Beyond. So that takes a different type of engagement with residents who own their own homes. The physical and social issues across the job, which Mark's talked about, costs as a result of change, the open spaces and the change of the configuration of the area. That's been really challenging, and how we've zoned that, and of course ensuring long-term value for all. Next slide, please. As a group, we also wanted to touch on the social value highlights that we've collectively managed to achieve at Church Lane North. We think that's really important. So we, as part of the consultation and as part of our engagement with Beyond from the outset, we've engaged and agreed a set of targets for this particular project. And I'd like to just run through some of the achievements from that. So we've done leaflet drops, door-to-door engagement, weekly Facebook posts to advertise support. We have a hub on site where we have a weekly drop-in session. We've created links with local schools to support and promote knowledge of the industry in all of its guises. We've created 6 new full-time roles. We've had 14 apprentices on the project, 4 new and 10 safeguarded. We've supported T-level students, work experience placements. We've made donations to the local community and action groups. We've managed to achieve in excess of 1,200 hours in terms of learner engagement in our workshops. We've delivered a week-long employability program to the residents on the estate, and we've contributed to over 27 hours of volunteer support through community big cleans and other things that are directly impactful to the local residents. Next slide, please. So lessons to share, which I think I've picked up a number as I've gone through this. The key thing for me, and certainly Equans, and I'm sure this will be echoed by Mark and Sarah, is that early engagement is absolutely critical with your partners. Understanding what it is that we're delivering, what the aspirations are for the particular project, how we're going to do it, how do we work together, what are the sort of rules of engagement around that, engaging with customers early enough to make a difference. So what I mean by that is we know what we're delivering, and we can give our customers a really good sense of what that will be and how that will affect them. The size, breadth and depth of the project team I've talked about, that's really important. A scheme like this really encourages a large team. Utilities, engagement with those to make sure that you aren't delayed through that. Customer experience officers are absolutely critical on any refurbishment regeneration project, but of a scheme of this size and nature. That consistency is really important, and we've had support from a customer experience officer who is reasonably local to the area, which we found of a real benefit. Joint working, we've had multiple lessons learned workshops between the parties, so that where we can understand what is going well, what isn't going so well, how do we improve on that. I think you've got to be open and honest about where we can make improvements and how do we make improvements collectively. I've mentioned the zoning of areas, and that is particularly prevalent to the infrastructure elements of the project, as well as the external gardens, which Sarah talked about, and how we zone those and deliver those with as least sort of negatively impactful on people as we can. Customer engagement, I've talked about extensively. That is really critical, and stakeholder engagement involvement, and that includes everybody. So that is people who live on the estate, the various groups that support that, but also the local agencies that support, including all of the project team. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. I'm going to hand back to Sarah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Darren. Hopefully that all came across what a close team we've been throughout this. And looking at the chat, we've got lots of questions about the non-physical elements, and I'm going to spend the last couple of minutes just talking about consultation and things like that have supported the delivery of this. So, and touch on some lessons that you might need to pick up in some of your projects. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, you will be wondering how we paid for it. So a significant proportion of this funding, it's a £16 million project, came from Beyond Housing themselves, and we were really lucky that the board backed this throughout and shared the vision, and we're able to continue to commit to this project as a priority right across the whole business, not just in development and regeneration. But we were also fortunate enough to be able to access the Affordable Homes programme from our gracious hosts today, in respect of the new build homes, and in the past 2 programmes we've been able to access that, and also estate regeneration funding via our local authority partner Redcar and Cleveland through Department of Levelling Up Housing and Community. So in total the grants for that come to about £2.5 million. As well as the funding, we've also had significant support from external partners, particularly Redcar and Cleveland Local Authority, as the Strategic Housing, Planning and Highways Authority, and from their ward members as well. From Cleveland Police, and particularly their Designing Out Crime officer has been a real key part of this. And if you're looking at regeneration projects, I'd urge you to work with your DOCO, Designing Out Crime officer, at your earliest opportunity, and they really provide a wealth of experience. And finally, we're looking towards the end of the physical delivery of works on site, and partners who might help ensure that the community can own their new spaces. And we're starting to work with partners such as Groundwork in that respect, and others too soon to mention. So next slide, please. So something that I hope has been referenced throughout, and I know has been picked up in the chat, is community engagement, but it's really worth highlighting again. And this is a busy slide because this is a busy part of the project. And it started with a couple of significant things that signalled the start of change to the community. If you remember at the beginning, I was saying and said, well, we'll believe it when we see a digger. So the chap in the centre with the broom and the spade across his shoulders is Luke, the caretaker. Darren's mentioned him. And before any work at all started, we employed Luke as a dedicated resource for the estate, who's been there from day one, well, before day one. And everyone needs a Luke in their lives. And he's so well regarded by the community. He's there day to day to respond to issues, keep us informed. He regularly texts me and any of the members of the project team to let us know what's going on, keep the estate clear of fly tipping and rubbish. And it's got to the point now where the relationship with the community and Luke is such that people feel guilty that he's got to pick it up after them. It's not some unseen person or, you know, somebody with a fly tipping notice from the local authority. And another thing that happened early on was the conversion of one of the long-term voids in the centre of the estate into a branded community hub. If you can see the row of people sitting underneath the branding in the middle. And that has meeting spaces and can host drop-in events, and it has a kitchen to use. And the branding's been part of this all the way through. I mentioned at the beginning to give that sense of ownership and commitment from us and a specific identity. Everybody in the site cabin, all the team and myself and everybody, and probably most of the residents, have branded mugs and pens, which seem nice to have, but actually it's created a real sense of ownership and belonging. We all need a Luke in our lives, as I said, but we also all need a Debbie in our lives, who is the resident liaison officer for Equans. And with Luke, she's another cog in between, beyond the residents, Equans, the local authority, providing on-the-spot information, and she regularly goes over and above for residents, helping them with other things outside of the regeneration works. We committed at the beginning to communication, whatever the message, from the start, and love it or loathe it. We have a Facebook page just for the estate, and this is quite often a live feed for issues. Street lights are off, we've had a power cut, when is my fence getting fixed, things like that. But also we get compliments and other questions through that. We had somebody looking for an albino ferret a few weeks ago, and then somebody else wanting us to pass on compliments to one of our operatives. And with Debbie and Luke on hand, we can often respond to questions and comments really, really quickly. And it's undoubtedly meant, I think, fewer formal complaints and issues. I would do it again, but it needs to be, if you were thinking of undertaking this, it needs to be resourced well to be able to get the best out of it, due to that expectation that it's quite an immediate form of communication on social media versus, say, email. As an absolute minimum, we post every Monday about the works that are due to be done that week, and every Friday about the works that have been done that week. And we've done that pretty much without fail, so that every week people know what's coming up, what to expect, and then that'll be followed up with a visit from Debbie to say, this week on your street or on your drive, this is what we're doing. And this is supplemented with regular newsletters and engagement with our employability team, litter picks and other more fun events as we go through. At the bottom left for me, the chap holding the baby, we recently held open houses for some of the rent to buy properties that have just been completed. And that's not just for marketing purposes, which it was, but also to ensure the community could have a really good look around the new builds and to get under the skin of them, and to know that they were just as eligible as anybody else for new homes on the estate, as well as people moving into the area. Next slide, please, Adam. So to sum up, before we go to a short film that shows the progress on site throughout and the questions and answer bit, on the left, I've set out some of the issues we've encountered, and Mark and myself and Darren have mentioned some of these throughout. And on the right are some of the lessons we'd like to share. And I suppose for me, some key takeaways is if you're going to do it, it's like planting a tree. The best time to do it is now. So the best time to do it was 10 years ago, and the second best time to do it is now. It will take longer than you think and be more complex than you could possibly imagine, but feel the fear and do it anyway. You need to work in close partnership with your contractors and your stakeholders, your community and any other partners, and build in points throughout the process to reflect and flex that approach if you need to. And accept that it won't be a smooth journey, and keep the vision and the objectives front and centre throughout, and keep those communication channels open. Next slide, please. So looking forward, we've got a few months left of the physical works and there's a lot to do. And we'll be able to start celebrating some of those kind of mini milestones like new roads opening, bringing the new roads in, and new road signs will be quite a significant part of this, new people moving in and new open spaces being delivered, and that flow around the estate starting to be realised. We really want to share with other people, which is why we did this. What have we learnt, and we're developing some web pages so that people can access the information that we've talked through, but perhaps in a little bit more detail on different themes. And I've shared a draft of that in the information that we sent round to you. An early light bulb moment for the residents on the residents group at Church Lane North came from a visit to another estate, another housing association, to see what regeneration work had happened then, to see the art of the possible. So if you're thinking about a similar approach, please do come and see us. We're always happy to have visitors. We're happy for people to come and visit and get under the skin of it. So that's an open invitation, perhaps not all to 565 of you on the same day, but if people would like to, please get in touch. Next slide, please. Key thing for the project team now is thinking about legacy and the transition from the old layout to the new layout, from a building site to a normal layout estate, and ensuring that we secure the outcomes that we wanted for ourselves and for the community, and to measure those throughout. And it kind of seems boring to end on a slide of essentially KPIs, but we've been really clear on the outcomes that we wanted. And so are the customers and the residents. And these have driven our actions right the way through and kept us all on track. And we'll continue to hold ourselves to account against these right through to the end. This, I think Mark probably said the same, and I'm sure Darren, this has been a real career highlight for me and the team. And it's hopefully a once in a career experience to do something on this type of scale. Just to finish off, we wanted to share with you a video that we've made to illustrate that journey, to bring it to life a little bit, and then we'll come back to the Q&A. So Adam, if you're happy to stop sharing the slides and start sharing the video, and so don't panic that there's no content for a moment, everybody. And there should be a video coming just now.
Nestled in the heart of Grangetown, Church Lane North is a vibrant estate brimming with history and community spirit. From its industrial roots, the neighbourhood has weathered the storm of economic change and has grown, fostering a deep sense of pride among its residents. Beyond Housing is committed to revitalising Church Lane North, delivering an ambitious regeneration scheme to give residents the homes and amenities they deserve, and breathing new life into the estate, creating a welcoming and vibrant community for all.
So this is it. We're at the beginning of the Church Lane North regeneration scheme. It's been a long time in the making, and we're finally starting in November 2021.
One of the main parts of this regeneration that I'm really looking forward to is Beyond Housing's community hub here on Avondale. I think it's going to be a massive support for the community. It's going to give a central location that people can go to.
So we're just going to head off and deliver some launch packs to the residents of Church Lane North in Grangetown.
I'm delighted to be here at the opening of the Church Lane North Hub, which marks the beginning of Beyond Housing's £16 million investment to deliver a major regeneration project. This scheme is strategically important for local residents, the community, and of course Beyond Housing.
Yeah, we can't wait for it to start. You know, we look out, don't we? You'll be like see wetting, what they're doing,
Yeah, what
going
they're
outdoors.
doing, yeah.
Yeah, you know, as soon as we see you wetting, orange jacket on, I'd start.
Yeah, I think we'll feel safer when it's all done.
This really now is about making sure that the homes that people live in are a great standard. The place that they're living in terms of the landscaping and the community looks so brilliant, and that things like land values and house values are supplemented as a result of this regeneration.
So my role is in community engagement and partnerships, and my job is to work with the community to identify what they feel they need in their area. We use the customer information, so what customers are telling us, to then look at the partnerships that we need to build and the relationships we need to build with other stakeholders, community groups, charities.
As well as regenerating the area at Church Lane North, our employment support and training team have also been working with the residents to help them gain employment, do training courses and improve their skills and employment opportunities. So throughout the time we've supported customers to get qualifications in customer service that's led to various jobs, and also gain licences such as a forklift truck licence to gain work in warehousing and construction industries.
My name's Debbie. I work for Equans, who are doing the regeneration on the Church Lane North. I enjoy meeting the residents. Most of us now are on first name terms of the regular ones that I do see. We get together, discuss what's happening on site, what is going well, and they are happy with the regeneration work that's happened so far.
I'm Sarah, I'm the regeneration manager from Beyond Housing, and it's March 2023 and we're about halfway through the works that have taken place. We've finished the external wall insulation on all the properties and the new roofs, and this week we're starting on the gardens, the extensions to gardens in Zone 1 and the new fencing and sheds that everybody will be receiving. As well as the works to the existing properties and the layout of the estate, we're also adding in 33 new build properties, which will be a mix of affordable rent, shared ownership and rent to buy.
Before I moved in, I was living in my mum's house in a box bedroom, which was very overcrowded. I applied for Tees Valley Home Finder account and applied for one of these properties, and we set up an arrangement for a viewing and I took it straight away. I feel like I've been really supported. There's always been someone there at the end of the phone. Chris has been amazing. And yeah, they've been great. I can't thank them enough.
Equans have organised a site-wide litter pick today, so we've brought down some volunteers from Beyond Housing from right across the business to do 2 sessions picking litter across the site. The idea being that as the regeneration works are finished on site over the next few months, that we're able to give the community back a clean and tidy site again.
Hi, I'm Gary. I'm the QS for the project. Really, we've come to a point of where we complete areas on the site, and I think it's really important that we show willing and get the areas clean and tidy and give that responsibility really back to the residents. As you can see from sort of behind me, that we've actually got a really good finish to the product, and the client's really pleased, and I hope the residents are really pleased. So yeah, it's about giving them back responsibility and giving them a nice, clean, tidy area to start with.
From the very beginning, we knew that creating a strong sense of community would be the foundation for the regeneration. We listened to residents and incorporated their feedback into the design, resulting in high quality homes, gardens and open spaces, improved privacy and better estate navigation. As we approach completion, we are proud to deliver these improvements for our customers, along with new roofing and external wall insulation that will make the homes more energy efficient and visually appealing. This regeneration project is about more than bricks and mortar. It's about creating a place where people feel connected, valued and proud to call their home.
Right, I think that's everything from you and everybody, Sarah, isn't it?
Yes.
That's great. Okay. Wow. I'm clapping as well. I think that was such a good summary of what regeneration includes. Thank you so much to the speakers for that. We're going to move into question and answers now. We've had a lot of questions around engagement, which I think Sarah and the others have actually given us a lot of information there, but I might pull out a couple of them as we go through. But would you like to put your cameras back on, Sarah, Mark and Darren, and then everybody can see you as we're going through. Thank you. I'm going to pick some questions, and hopefully this helps cover the ones which have been most liked. But before I do that, if there was one thing each of you could say is the absolutely most important thing to do when you're dealing with regeneration, where we've seen people are remaining in their homes whilst this is happening on the whole, so much to do, what would it be? If I go to Mark first.
I think it's worth remembering that every single property, every single resident has a different driver and different problems. And that has probably been the biggest headache. I'm sure Darren and his team would pick up on that. It doesn't matter how many times you show them a drawing or you show them a visual or the model, which went down really well. Nobody actually takes it seriously until the day the digger turns up. And then they say, you mean my drive's moving from there to there? I didn't know about that. We've only been talking about it for 4 years, but okay, we'll work with you. So yeah, that's everybody is different, and that is what adds the complexity. Every plot, every resident.
Darren, what was it for you?
I think for us, and Mark's covered that really nicely. Actually, I think it's plan and communicate and be flexible. I know that's more than one thing, but as a collective, it's plan, communicate often, regularly, in a good way, and do what you say you're going to do.
Okay, and Sarah?
Well, we've both said what I was going to say, which was communicate, 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 expect the unexpected, but do it anyway.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to some specific questions. The first one I'm going to pick out is, what considerations were made around active travel or green transport, and did this impact thinking on the potential parking spaces? So we'll go to you, Mark, for that one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got to remember this is predominantly a regeneration scheme. So all the houses are already in existence, and any request from planners is based on the current arrangement. So we just had to make sure that if there were 319 parking spaces by the time we'd finished, there were still 319 parking spaces. So the parking side was relatively straightforward. There's a rule book and you follow that. In terms of active travel, obviously by reinforcing the roads, it makes people more encouraged to walk to school, because it's a safer place to do that, and they don't mind their children walking home along the streets to get to their house. They're not walking down these horrible alleyways. So that in itself helps the active travel. In terms of cycling, I'll be honest with you, there wasn't much cycle ownership on the estate. Planning policy is obviously different now, where that would have been a factor, but I can't see that it would have reduced the amount of parking spaces, to be brutally honest with you.
Okay, I think that's probably something that people doing this now would need to be thinking about.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, and biodiversity net gain and things as well. Yes.
Yeah, there's different rules for the new build. Obviously, we did have to do a little bit more for the new build, but there wasn't much new build on this estate. It is all about the existing.
Okay, and I'm going to come to you, Sarah, now. What were I think you've said this, but it might be useful just to pull it out a bit more for people, but what were the tenure of the new homes, and how did that affect the financial viability of the scheme?
Oh, thanks, Karen. So out of the 33 new builds on the estate, there's 6 rent to buy, 4 shared ownership, and the remainder are affordable rent. And that's in a mix of type and size. So most of the existing properties were 3 beds. So we've added in some 1-bed bungalows, some 2 beds, and some 4 beds, so that people have, and somebody asked the question about downsizing, but people have got the opportunity to right size potentially from their existing property, or to move from around the area with it into this estate.
Great. Back to you, Mark. And I was interested in this one actually as well. And it again, it might come back to it's a regeneration scheme, but what considerations were given for green infrastructure, such as sustainable urban drainage or tree planting?
Sure. Okay. So again, because it was predominantly regeneration, the existing houses were okay. We didn't really need to make any changes to those, but obviously the new build triggers sustainable urban drainage. So we did have extensive attenuation in the new roads to comply with that. And because we were creating new drives as well, then the new regulations would apply to that. So that would have been redirected into, as I say, into attenuation tanks. In terms of green infrastructure, there was a limit to where we could plant because the whole estate is riddled with the services. We've got new services going in. We've got a lot of existing services as well, which we couldn't touch, and we had to dodge them. And a number of times Darren and his team came across services in different locations to where we were anticipating them, even though I have to say we did do a site-wide scan of all the services. And even so, we still found new services that weren't in different locations. So we did put planting in, but only in 3 dedicated areas. So the central part of the estate that we wanted to improve, the area where the parents would congregate for the school, and then at the other side as well. So it's important you still create those amenity spaces, but they're high quality instead of just a random tree planting everywhere.
And have you found people have looked after the trees now they're in place?
I think we're not quite there yet. I think that's the last thing to go in is the tree planting. So that will be this coming season.
Yeah. I know you said you're going to work with groundwork as well, so that can help with that community involvement. Material dues, and if so, get additional funding from. So Darren first on the supply chain and costs. Sarah, if you think about funding.
I'm sorry, Karen, I couldn't hear what you were saying.
Right, I'll repeat that. So did Darren see any impacts from cost inflation on the supply chain materials? And if so, how did you manage to secure additional funding? Darren first.
Sorry, Karen. Yeah, there has been inflationary pressure on the projects. We've seen hyperinflation, which is coming down now, thankfully, but the project has been definitely impacted by both the cost of material and the availability of.
And Sarah?
Yes, I suppose some lessons to be learned would be don't do this through a global pandemic, a mini budget and a war in Europe, but that's not really a takeaway message for anybody. But yeah, there's certainly been some challenges on costs throughout, as Darren's alluded to, and that in part explains why the programme's taken a little bit longer than we expected, but we've more or less managed to keep within similar cost envelope.
Yeah, I think you said at the end of your presentation that there was significant funding from different sources as well, and pulling that together was part of your job. Well, was there a difference between the owner-occupiers and the tenants in terms of buying into the scheme at all? Sarah?
Sorry, was that about our customers and private?
Yes.
Okay. So we own about 75% of the properties on the estate, and the rest are a mix between owner-occupied, former occupied. Sorry, Karen, can you just mute yourself because I'm getting so bad. I keep echo. That's better. And private rented and owner-occupied. So as Mark said, the owner-occupiers and private landlords had the opportunity to buy into the EWI and external wall insulation and the roofing, which many didn't take us up on that. So we were careful to make the design as tenure blind and tenure neutral as we possibly could. However, we have in many cases provided the fencing to maintain that continuous look of a run of properties and things like that. So there's been some benefits, and we've worked really carefully with private owners and landlords and their tenants as well as our own customers.
Yeah, I think that's lessons learned from earlier regeneration, where the right to buys do stand out later on don't they, in terms of the people haven't necessarily got the money to do the significant external works that you did to the existing properties.
When we have people come and visit, we usually challenge them to try and pick out which ones are which. And normally people can't unless they've got a very keen eye. So hopefully we've done that right.
So a practical question next. Mark, we're going to direct this one at yourself. So were there any internal works required when you were turning the houses around? And in terms of to fit in with new layouts and using that green space, and did you do that with people in situ, and how did that all work basically?
Yeah, we did set out with the intention that that's what we had to do. We just assumed that we would have to move things around and do internal configuration. So we did design for that. There's maybe 5 different house types across the estate, and we have a solution for that. The reality is, when we actually came to it, we were under financial pressure, obviously, on the estate anyway, on the whole scheme. And we found that it wasn't in the end necessary to do that. And bizarrely, when we actually got round to analysing the houses in detail, once we've identified the best place for the roads, it was very strange. But the house, the estate was actually laid out in a certain way that there was probably 3/4 of the houses were actually in the right orientation, which must go back to the very first master plan that was ever done. It maybe was intended to face in a certain direction. So there wasn't much compromise by the residents that didn't get things turned around. So, okay, that means their front door effectively takes them into their kitchen now as opposed to into a hallway. But the residents didn't seem too concerned about that, actually.
Thank you. And I mean, it did sound like you had positive support from the local councillors, but there's people are asking in terms of, was there opposition from local councillors and other politicians relating to the project? Probably for you, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, as I mentioned through the presentation, at the time the ward councillor, but also he's now the ward councillor and the portfolio holder for neighbourhoods, is one of the residents on the site. So we were, he knows firsthand what's going on day to day, but we've been really fortunate that both himself and the other ward councillor who lives nearby have been really, really supportive. I speak to them really regularly, and I do them at least every 6 weeks, an email update of what's going on now, what's coming next. They ring one of the project team anytime they want. We're in constant communication with them. So far, so good with the local members. I think they've bought into the vision and can see that it's beginning to be realised on site now.
Yeah, and they're living through it themselves by the sounds of it. Yeah. So a question for Darren. Which form of contract did Equans and Beyond Housing enter into?
The former contracts are JCT, D&B. Fairly standard form, where we've taken on elements of design and Beyond have retained some through Mark. So fairly standard form, Karen.
Right. It's good to get the really practical questions as well, isn't it? And see people really want to do it too. Mark has also identified in the original estate as seen as assets on many award-winning estates. So pedestrianised layouts and public green spaces. So were any of the residents keen to retain those, or did they see them as relevant to anything?
I'm sorry, Karen, that broke up again. I didn't quite catch that. Can you just say that again?
Yeah, some of the faults identified on the original estate.
Yes.
So many award-winning estates. So including pedestrianised layouts and open. What were any of the residents keen to retain them? And I know you said there was quite a lot.
Generally, it was really well received. There were a few people that had a brick outhouse at what was originally the front of their property or the back of their property, which suddenly became the front, and they were quite reluctant to lose those. But if you can imagine, we created these lovely new streets with brick outhouses at the front. interspersed with cars, that was a real problem. So that's one area where we had to negotiate with them. And the way we did that was to give them a shed in their rear garden, which is obviously now secure. And most of the residents accepted that. But there was a little bit of reluctance. But once we started doing sort of effectively phase one, people could actually see what we meant. Again, it goes back, as I was saying at the beginning, it doesn't matter how many times, how many drawings you show them. It's not until they physically see those fences going in that they totally understand what it is that we're trying to achieve. So generally, in answer to your question, pretty well received, actually.
Okay, so we're starting to run out of bespoke questions and we've got something now in the chat in terms of the hub, what's your intention for the hub in the meeting?
Thanks, Karen. I'd heard the word hub, so I'm going to answer the question I think you might have asked instead of perhaps what you asked. So, as I said, we converted Early Doors, one of the long-term voids, into a community hub, branded up in the Church Lane North branding with bedrooms as meeting rooms, but essentially still a house. And we are now looking at the ways that the community want to use that once the site team are off-site, once it's more accessible, once it faces on to the main part of the open space. So we're looking again with groundwork and with others at what the best uses of that. Local ward members engaged in those discussions to look at perhaps a community shop or a glut store for the allotments that are on the site that he's involved with. So looking at options right now, but yeah, the intention is to continue that use. But it could just be changed back to a home again if we needed.
Right, so hopefully I'm not quacking up this time, but I think Darren, it could be Darren or Sarah. When did the contractor become involved with the project team? Was it at REBA stage 2? And did the architect start a brand new master plan or pick up on an existing one? So I'll let you decide who comes in first, but it feels a bit like Darren, then maybe some of Mark.
I can't comment on what stage it was at because I wasn't here at the time, Karen. However, we've been involved for several years now. It was run almost as a two-stage process, and Mark will be able to speak to that a little with more clarity because Mark has been involved throughout the entire scheme's sort of history and lifetime and life cycle. But yeah, I mean, I mentioned a few times throughout the presentation that early engagement from us as a contractor to support both the design team, the professional team and the client is really important to get the right kind of outcomes on a scheme of this nature.
Yeah, well, it was 6 years ago, I think. The contractor came in at the back end of stage 2, just coming into stage 3. So the contractor submitted the planning application. So as I say, back end of stage 2. In answer to the question about the master plan, I did touch on it on my presentation. There was a master plan originally in place, but it was for quite significant demolition. And my brief was actually to look at selective demolition. So what was the minimum number of houses we needed to demolish in order to make a difference?
Thank you. I think that's probably quite a good point to end with the questions in terms of, what's the minimum you can do to make a difference, but create a great place for people to live. So at that, I'm going to bring the question and answers to a close now. We will keep responding to questions in the chat and we'll come back to them later after this is closed. But I would like to say a really big thank you to the speakers today, Sarah, Darren, Mark. You've done a really good job for everything. I'd like to say thank you to the people who've contributed today. Don't leave yet. We've still got a bit more work for you to do, so hang on in there. And the people in the background who are working their socks off to make sure that this works. And also, we really need to say thank you to Luke and Debbie and the wider team who are working on these think as well. They're really doing a good job. So if we can move to the next slide now, please. And we've got a couple of more questions we'd like you to respond to after you've seen these take-home messages that we've got pulled together, and there's some very useful links there as well. So we're getting close to the close time. I'm going to give you 10 minutes back, which I think everybody's always keen on, especially when it's near lunchtime. But thank you again for taking part today, and please let us know what you think through that survey, and goodbye.